So we're going to have a look at a basic tree diagram. These are the sorts of things you learnt a few years ago. It's just finding another way to represent a sample space. So a coin is flipped 3 times. Use a tree diagram to show all possible outcomes. Well, basically a tree diagram works a bit like this. The first set of branches are to do with the first step. So my first step is that I have 2 options. I flip a coin and I get a head, or I get a tail. Then I flip a second coin and I get, no matter what happened in beforehand, I have 2 more possible outcomes. I have a head or a tail. Sorry about that. And my third step, which I'll do in red, is when I flip the coin the third time. And I can get a head or a tail, a head or a tail, a head or a tail, a head or a tail. So my sample space can be written over here, and all I do is I follow the branches. So to get to this final spot, I have to have gone down this branch, down this branch, down this branch, which makes a head, a head, a head. To get to this outcome, I would have had to have travelled down there, down there, down there. So that was head, head, tail, head, head, tail. And I can keep doing that. So to get to this outcome, I travelled up, travelled across, and travelled up, which is head, tail, head. And here we go, and I'll finish off last one. Head, tail, 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 head, head, tail, head, tail, 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 head, tail, tail, tail. So here is my sample space, and there are 8 possible outcomes. Now you'll notice that all of these, in this diagram, there's no probabilities anywhere. And the reason there's no probabilities written everywhere is because the assumption is that it's a fair coin and that the chance of a head is 50% or 0.5 and the chance of a tail is 0.5 or 50%. Okay? So in equally likely events, we can just have an unweighted tree diagram, or we might just call it a tree diagram. In order to find out the probability of any one outcome in an equally likely tree, so for example, the probability of getting 3 heads, okay, well, we look at all the possible outcomes and we say, oh, look, we only have one outcome that has 3 heads out of 8. We might say, well, okay, what about the probability of getting 2 heads? The probability of getting 2 heads. It doesn't specify what order, so I just need to look for, well, where do I get, oh, and it might say exactly 2 heads, in which case I've got this outcome, this outcome, this outcome, and that's it. So there are 3 outcomes out of 8 outcomes where we get exactly 2 heads. Now I must stress that this method of just counting the amount of outcomes at the end only works for when we have equally likely outcomes at each step.